If I can ask all the brothers to please take a seat and welcome Brother Howard with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil faraj.
نعرہ تکبیر، نعرہ رسالت، نعرہ حیدری حیدری، نعرہ صلوات. محمد آل محمد بلند تر صلوات. یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا. یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا. اسیر ہو کے جب شام میں گیا ہوگا. یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا. وہ ظلم دیکھے ہیں سجاد نے حسین کے وہ ظلم دیکھے ہیں سجاد نے حسین کے مجھے یقین ہے کہ اب تک بھی رو رہا ہوگا. مجھے یقین ہے کہ اب تک بھی رو رہا ہوگا. یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا. وہ یاد کرتا تو ہوگا وطن کی شاہی کو. وہ یاد کرتا تو ہوگا وطن کی شاہی کو. بہن بہن کو دفن جو پردیس میں کیا ہوگا. بہن کو دفن جو پردیس میں کیا ہوگا، یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا، اسیر ہو کے جب شام میں گیا ہوگا۔ اللہ اکبر اللہ۔ سنا ہے شام میں جاتے ہی خون رونے لگا، سنا ہے شام میں جاتے ہی خون رونے لگا، نہ جانے شمر نے اس وقت کیا کہا ہوگا، نہ جانے شمر نے اس وقت کیا کہا ہوگا، یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا۔ گلے کے توق نے عابد کو کیا جھکانا تھا، گلے کے توق نے عابد کو کیا جھکانا تھا، وہ اپنے کھوئے ہوئے لال ڈھونڈتا ہوگا، وہ اپنے کھوئے صلوات
صلوات خیال فاطمہ دین کی آبرو زینب، خیال فاطمہ دین کی آبرو زینب، علی امام کی سجدوں میں آرزو زینب، خیال فاطمہ دین کی آبرو زینب، مجھے حسین کی بے مثل سجدگاہ کی قسم، کہیں نہ ہوتی نماز و قرآن کی باتیں، منا تو لات کی پوجا بحال ہو جاتی، نہ کرتے لوگ دہر میں ایمان کی باتیں، سنائے خطبے جو
جاتی نہ خوب خو زینب، خیال فاطمہ دین کی آبرو زینب۔ عجیب عالم غربت تھا شام میں لوگوں، رسن میں قیدی تھی بالوں سے منہ چھپائے ہوئے، چہار سمت سے ہونے لگی تھی سنگ باری، ہوئی جو داخل بازار سر جھکائے ہوئے، بچا کے دین کو ہو گئی لہو لہو زینب، خیال فاطمہ دین کی آبرو زینب، خیال فاطمہ دین کی آبرو زینب۔ ہجوم عام سے گزری تو ایک عورت نے علی کی بیٹی کو پتھر اٹھا کے مارا تھا، بہا جو خون تو چہرے پہ ایک نقاب بنا، یہ پردہ دار کی فتح کا ایک اشارہ تھا، چلی تھی جانب دربار سرخ رو زینب، خیال فاطمہ دین کی آبرو زینب۔ صلوات۔
اعوذ باللہ من الشیطان الرجیم، بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم، الحمدللہ رب العالمین، بر محمد و آل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم۔ میں نے جو کلام پڑھنا تھا وہ بھائی خاور نے پڑھ دیا تو میں ہٹ کے چل۔ وہ جو مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے، وہ جو مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے، گو وہ رہتا نہیں پر نام سدا رہتا ہے، وہ جو مصروف سلام شہداء رہتا ہے۔ شمر کہتا تھا یہی بات علی اکبر کی، جس کا ایک ہاتھ کلیجے پہ دھرا رہتا ہے، جس کا ایک ہاتھ کلیجے پہ دھرا رہتا ہے، وہ جو مصروف شام ہوتے ہیں تو اونٹوں سے اترتے ہیں حرم، شام ہوتے ہیں تو اونٹوں سے اترتے ہیں حرم، پر سر شاہ تو نیزے پہ چڑھا رہتا ہے، پر سر شاہ تو نیزے پہ چڑھا رہتا ہے۔ ہند کی بیٹی نے زندہ میں سکینہ سے کہا، ہند کی بیٹی نے زندہ میں سکینہ سے کہا، سر تیرا کس لیے ہے بینا کھلا رہتا ہے، سر تیرا کس لیے ہے بینا کھلا رہتا ہے۔ بی بی کا جواب سنیے۔ رو کے بولے وہ یتیموں کی نشانی ہے یہی، مولا آپ کے آنسو قبول کرے۔ جناب زہرا سلام اللہ اس کا اجر دے سکتے ہیں۔ رو کے بولے وہ یتیموں کی نشانی ہے یہی، کرتا بے وارث بچوں کا پھٹا رہتا ہے، کرتا بے وارث بچوں کا پھٹا رہتا ہے۔ ہے یہ شرمندگی پانی کے نہ پہنچانے کی، ہے یہ شرمندگی پانی کے نہ پہنچانے کی، نز پہ سر عباس جھکا رہتا ہے، نز پہ بے سر عباس جھکا رہتا ہے، وہ جو مصروف سلام شہدا رہتا ہے۔ بار محمد و آل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم۔
Please recite a loud salawat for all of tonight's reciters. Umma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Malana Saab, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Please join me reciting Surah Al-Fatiha once and Surah Ikhlas 3 times for all the marhumeen, especially the marhumeen of the person who sponsored tonight's niyaz. So please join me reciting Surah Al-Fatiha once and Surah Ikhlas 3 times. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Also join me reciting 5 times Dua Shafa for all the Maris in the community. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amma yujibu al-mustarra iza da'a wa yakshifu su. Amma yujibu al-mustarra iza da'a wa yakshifu su. Amma yujibu al-mustarra iza da'a wa yakshifu su. أما يجيب المسر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المسر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء أما يجيب المسر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Important announcement for tomorrow. The program will start at 8 p.m. followed by seated niyaz, and the rest of the program will continue after that. However, there is no parking in Cheta Junior Car Park due to a match day at Watford FC. So any brothers living locally, so we're kindly requesting for people to either walk, car share. There may be, if you're willing to comply with the charges and regulations at Cheta Junior Car Park for match day, there may be a chance to park there, but there will be a cost of about £5 to £10, and it's subject to them having empty space and allowing you to actually come into Cheta Junior. So again, tomorrow Cheta Junior, there's no car park and spaces in the centre will be very limited. So by this time tomorrow night, there will be no spaces in the centre car park. Very likely that will happen. A message from Al-Zahra Youth Girls. Sister Mariam is doing some fundraising and organizing future events. So if any sisters want to contribute or get any more information, please speak with Sister Mariam upstairs from Al-Zahra Youth Girls. If you would like to sponsor a program, niyaz, pay membership, or make any type of donation, please see Shubisha or Sayyid Imran Hussain, who are normally seated at the back, but they are available during any of these nights. Now, without any further delay, if I can please invite Maulana Sayyid Mohammed Rizvi for tonight's English Majlis. Please welcome him with a loud salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. For the marhumin of the sponsors of tonight's majlis, for all of your own marhumin, please recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الأفضل الموجودات العبد المؤيد الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد والمحمود الأحمد سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا صاحب الوقار والسكينة المدفون بأرض المدينة أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم وهو أصدق القائلين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وابيضت عيناه من الحزن فهو كظيم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. Part 3 of the series of lectures of theoretical and practical lessons from the life of Imam Sajjad. Tomorrow being the night of the Shahadat of the Holy Imam, being the night of Taboot, I'll give more time to Urdu. So inshallah today I want to wrap up in English. 2 nights so far. One night I gave you Salat and Sayyidul Sajidin. The second night I gave you Dua and Sayyidul Sajidin. Today I give you Azadari and Sayyidul Sajidin. Tears and Sayyidul Sajidin. Because the time was different, hence the approach and the methodology of the Imam switched. He used the Salat to call people to Ahlul Bayt. The way he prayed, people said no one prays like Sayyidul Sajidin. Hence he is Sayyidul Sajidin. The way he recited du'as, they said no one recites du'as like that, so they called Sahifa Sajjadiya Zubur of Al-Muhammad. Zubur Al-Muhammad, Sahifa Sajjadiya. They said no one calls Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like he does. Hence he must know Allah better than anyone else. Ya Asma As-Sami'een, Ya Arham Ar-Rahimeen, Ya Akram Al-Akrameen. No one calls Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like Ahlul Bayt have taught us to call Allah. Ya Nuru Ya Quddus, Ya Ghayath Al-Mustaghithin, Ya Sari Ar-Ridha. Who calls Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like this? Except those who have true ma'rifah of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Today, tears and Sayyid al-Sajjad, Azadari and Sayyid al-Sajjad, A'za of Imam Hussain and Sayyid al-Sajjad. This was another way to call people towards the door of Hussain. Throughout his time in Medina, from the return from Sham, after Karbala, post-Karbala period, Imam alayhi salatu wasalam spent each and every day in the Azadari of Imam Hussain. We spent 2 months? Until Arba'een, until Eid al-Zahra, 2 months, 8 days. Imam Sajjad alayhi salatu wasalam, his whole life, remaining life after Karbala, he said, we didn't celebrate Eid after Karbala. He said, I never attended any gatherings of happiness, any weddings after Karbala. People said, Mawla, my children are getting married, please bless our house with your marriage. Imam says, no, after Karbala, I will only attend if it's a majlis of my father Hussain. Let me give you Azadari and Sayyid al-Sajjad. For our life is Azadari. Muharram and Safar is what? Azadari. Ayaam Aza. Ayaam Sog. Why? Because we mourn Hussain. And no one mourned Hussain as he should be mourned except Sayyid al-Sajjad and Zainab Kubra. Number one, whenever anyone presented food or water, Imam Sajjad would remember his father Hussain. Anytime anyone would give him a glass of water, tears would flow. And he would say, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. My father was killed thirsty. Anytime someone would present food, he would say, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah, yawmika yawmika ya Aba Abdullah. My father was killed hungry. So say the Shuhada was not just thirsty, even though we say Al-Atash, Al-Atash, Hussain, Awlad al-Hussain, Ashab al-Hussain were both hungry and thirsty. Yes, Imam Hussain never asked for food. In Karbala, when he took Ali Asghar, he asked for water. Why? To show the world that water is a basic human necessity. No one has a right to stop water. And perhaps he was indirectly reminding them, did I not give you water when you stopped me and brought me to Karbala? The forces of Hur at that time. Perhaps Imam was reminding him that I gave you water. I gave your horses water. So, this is the practical lesson from the life of Imam Sajjad. Azadari is not just on Farsh Azah. Azadari is 24/7. Anytime you drink water, say Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. And Allah will make that drinking a ibadah. Anytime you and I will drink water, turn towards Karbala and say Assalamu alayki Sayyidi Mawlai ya Aba Abdullah. Oh Hussain, you were thirsty. I drink water, but I won't never forget your thirst. If you can't even do that, if you can't even recite that ziyarah, just take water. Say Ya Hussain, Ya Abbas, and drink water. 2 words, Ya Hussain, Ya Abbas. Allah will make each and every sip of water you drink ibadah. Worship. So Imam Sajjad did not wait for Muharram or Safar. Imam Sajjad, Azadari 24/7. Food reminds me of the people of Karbala. Water reminds me of the people of Karbala. And Imam Sajjad would shed tears. Let me tell you something about the thirst of Al-Muhammad. So you really get an idea of how thirsty Ahlul Bayt were. When you fast on a hot day, especially in hot climate, in the eastern countries, Middle East, India, Pakistan, the Arab countries, when you fast in hot desert climate, is the thirst that kills you more than the hunger. Bear with me on this. This is important. And come iftar, when you sit on the sufra of iftar, the first thing you look for is water. And in that thirst, when you first drink water, the first few sips of water do not quench your thirst. If you notice, when you're thirsty, when you take the first few sips of water, they only activate your taste buds even more. They only make you more thirsty. Until you drink enough, then your thirst is quenched. Al-Muhammad was so thirsty that even when they got water, it wasn't enough to quench their thirst. It was only enough to keep them alive. Let that sink in for a minute. When you take the first few sips of water, it only ignites the thirst. Until you've had enough water, a stomach full, that is when the thirst is quenched. And I'm sure you've all noticed that. When you do faqa on the day of Ashur, you don't eat until Asr. You drink that water, you only want more, but you hold back. You say, I can't fast on the day of Ashur. We don't fast on the day of Ashur. So we are forced to drink. But by God, we don't want to drink when Hussain is thirsty. The most difficult time for a mu'min to drink is Asr Ashur. When we open our faqa shikni. That is the most difficult time. But we do it only because we don't fast on the day of Ashura. We don't have a fast of Ashur. But Ahlul Bayt, it's not that after Imam Hussain ﷺ was martyred, they gave them, jug and tons of water. It's not like that. Whatever water they got, it was only enough to keep them alive. And even then it didn't satisfy, it did not quench the thirst. And that is the most difficult part. Recite salawat. Imam alayhi salatu wassalam, every time he drinks water, every time he eats. Ayaam Ahlul Bayt, from Imam Sajjad to Imam Al-Baqir to Imam Al-Sadiq to Imam Ali ibn Musa Rada to Imam Musa Al-Kadhim, Imam Ali ibn Musa, until the rest of the A'immah, all of the Imams would ask the Shu'ara to come and recite Marsiyah for Imam Hussain. In their time, Arabs were known for Qasida. They were known to recite Ash'ar, poetry. The 6th Imam, Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. A poet by the name of Ja'far ibn Affan enters his house and he says to him, Oh Ja'far, I've heard that you have written a marsiyah, a qasida, Masaib of Imam Hussain. He says, yes, Mawla, may I be ransomed, sacrificed for you. he says to him, "Oh Ja'far, stand up and recite for me the mercy of my grandfather Hussain." He stands up and he begins to recite the Marsiyah. Imam draws a curtain. He asks his women to come and sit on the other side. And they begin to cry. He says he has only said a few lines that the crying was so loud in the house of Imam as-Sadiq that they had to tell him to stop. Same thing in the times of the Aimma. The Imams would cry so much that their beard would be drenched. I mean, have you ever cried where your beard is drenched in your tears? We've never cried that much. You know why Imam Imam Zain al-Abidin would cry so much that his beard is drenched? Why he wouldn't? Because when you and I, when we cry, we only hear. But when Sajjad would hear, he would remember what he saw. It's a big difference. It's a difference between imagining what happened in Karbala and reliving what happened in Karbala. That's why Imam Sajjad, 30 years, some say 35 years, some say 40 years, Imam Sajjad cried. Ayatollah Allama Tabatabai, Sahib al-Tafsir al-Mizan, he says that I would give up everything to recite one mercy of Imam Hussain. I'll give up my tafsir, I'll give up the house, I'll give up the dars and durus, whatever I taught, for one mercy of Imam Hussain. Ayatollah Bahjat says, crying for Abu Abdullah al-Hussain carries more sawab than Salatul Layl. Namaz tahajjud. More sawab in crying for Imam al-Hussain than praying up all night of Salatul Layl. It says there is no reward like there is in crying for Abu Abdullah. And you know the ulama in Najaf and Qum, they don't wait for Muharram. Every Shab-e-Juma in their houses, even if it's 3 people, 3 of them will sit, 1 of them will recite Masaib of Imam Hussain. Even if it's 2-3 lines. This is why Shab-e-Juma is important. Because Shab-e-Juma belongs to Abu Abdullah al-Hussain. Shab-e-Juma, throughout after Muharram and Safar, Shab-e-Juma is our Muharram and Safar. Outside of the Ayaam Sajjadiya, outside of Muharram and Safar. This is why Shab-e-Juma is so important, that we keep our centers alive Shab-e-Juma. Majalis alive Shab-e-Juma. Ziyarat-e-Warisa alive Shab-e-Juma. And in return, these things will keep us alive. They keep our Iman alive. Who are we to keep the zikr of Imam Hussain alive? We are alive because we do the zikr of Hussain. Otherwise, what is our, what do we have to offer to Hussain? Hussain is someone who offered to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Who offered everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why, don't wait for Muharram and Safar. Azadari, Masaib, Girya, tears, Shab-e-Juma in the Imam Bargah. Until you reach the next Muharram again. Brothers, when Muharram and Safar is finished, don't fall into this lazy trap. That's it, we have cried for Hussain. By God, we can never cry for Hussain. We can never cry for Imam Hussain. How much blood Hussain gave, we can never give even water of tears for how much blood Imam Hussain gave. Even if we cry every Shab-e-Juma in the Imam Bargah, by God we will not make justice, kama haqqahu, how we should cry for Abu Abdullah al-Hussain. This is why Shab-e-Juma is important, that we attend majalis. We come and we take part in matam, in azah, in reciting, if you want to recite. Because the Imams encourage those to recite. Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Radha alayhi salatu was-salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Imam al-Radha would bring his most famous poet, Da'bal, and he would say to him, recite. And then when he finished reciting, he would sit him with him. And he would show him more respect than the rest. He said, why? Because he's a zakir of Hussain. Because he does the zikr of Hussain. Do not take it lightly. Do not take it small to be someone who recites. Aimma would cherish. Aimma gave value to the zakir of Hussain. The one who recites, one who cries for Hussain, one who makes someone cry for Hussain, one who makes a face, even if he can't cry, one who makes a face as if he cries for Hussain, wajabat lahu jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make Jannah. This is the tear, that even one tear that comes off of Abdullah al-Hussain is priceless. How? Let me give you something from Marhum Ayatullah Shaykh Muhammad Taqi and al-Bahjat. Rahmatullah. Bahjat, he says, and listen to this, the value of that one tear that you shed for Hussain. Marhum Ayatullah Bahjat says there used to be a village outside Najaf, Musayyab. In that village was a mu'min. Every Shabbat Juma. You see why Shabbat Juma is important? Because every Shabbat Juma you should go to Karbala. And if you can't do that, then you better come to the Imam Bargah. Because the Imam Bargah is the place where you feel closest to Hussain, away from the land of Hussain. You with me? Agha Bahjat says that mu'min every Shabbat Juma would go to Karbala. So he would go to Najaf, because he lived outside of Najaf, he would walk towards the haram of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. Every Shabbat Juma. In his village was a Nasibi, Sunni Nasibi, anti-Ahlul Bayt. He hated Ahlul Bayt. Ayatullah Bahjat says that every time this old man would take this journey and he would walk, old man take a stick, barely able to keep his back up. But the love of Ali and the love of Najaf would drag him to the haram of Ali ibn Abi Talib. But this Nasibi couldn't take it. Every time he would go, he would make fun of him. He would mock him. He would abuse him verbally. One time it got so bad, Ayatullah Bahjat says, it got so bad that this Nasibi not only abused him, he abused Amirul Mu'mineen. Whatever he said, it's not in the books. But it says he abused Amirul Mu'mineen. This man cried his way to Najaf. He entered the haram. He says, Ya Ali, I'm tired of him. Ya Ali, you deal with him. Ya Ali, you deal with him. I never complained to you until he cursed me, but I complain today because he curses you. You know what Ayatullah Bahjat says? He says that night he slept in Najaf. He saw Amirul Mu'mineen in his dream. Look how gracious Amirul Mu'mineen is towards his lovers, towards his followers. But it is strange what he says. You know what Ali ibn Abi Talib says? He says to him, we see everything. We know everything. But there's a problem. He says, Mawla, what is the problem? He says that Nasibi has a haqq upon me. Allah Akbar. Listen to this. He said that Nasibi has a right upon me. And because of that, at least in the dunya, I cannot do anything to him. Akhirat will see to it. But in the dunya, I can't do anything to that Nasibi. He says, Mawla, what do you mean? What do you mean? He curses you. He makes fun of me when I come to your ziyarah. He says, listen, one day the same man was sitting alone on a quiet day by the Shatt al-Furat, by the river of Furat. And he was looking into the water. And to himself, this Nasibi, he said, what Umar ibn Sa'd did in Karbala was wrong. He should have given Hussain some water and then killed Hussain. And just that thought that Hussain died thirsty brought tears into his eyes. He says, that tear has a haqq upon me. Allah Akbar. I don't know if I'm conveying this to you. But this is all I can say. If you take it, you take it. If you don't, you don't. He says that Nasibi has a haqq on me. He shed a tear. Look at the value of the tear in the love of Hussain. He says because he felt sorry for Hussain, and he says Umar ibn Sa'd was wrong. He should have given. It was too much. It was too far to block water for 3 days on Imam al-Hussain. He says because of that, I don't want to do anything to him in dunya. He says he returns from Najaf. He sees the man and he mocks him. He says, did you meet your Mawla and Master? Did he give you anything? Do you ever get anything from Najaf? He says, yes, I met my master. And my master says that you have a haqq upon him. Because that day when you sat at the Furat, you shed a tear for Hussain. As soon as he heard that, he started to shake. He says, by God, I was alone. I've never told anyone that I cried for Hussain. He says, I was alone. I never told anyone that I cried for Hussain. He began to tremble. He became pale. He says, look, if this is your Mawla and Master, then ashhadu anna aliyan waliyullah. If this is your Mawla, he drops to the ground and he says, Ya Ali, forgive me. Ya Ali, I've sinned. I testify to your wilaya, to your imama. Recite salawat, please. Ya Ali. The value of the tear of Abu Abdullah. One tear. Imagine Sayyid Sajjad. And so this is how Imam Sajjad brought people towards azadari, towards crying for Imam Hussain. Did you know the majalis that you do at your homes, in your homes, they began in the homes of Al-Muhammad. The first mimbar for the musibah of Imam Hussain was built by Imam Sajjad. The first mimbar was made by Imam Sajjad. The first person to sit on the mimbar and to recite Masaib was Imam Sajjad. Imam Ali ibn al-Hussain. As they returned to Medina, Bibi Zainab Kubra gathers the women of the Hashemites, Bani Hashim. And she holds a majlis in the house. Imam Sajjad sits outside and he prepares food for those women who are crying inside. What does this teach you? Majlis, mimbar, niyaz. Majlis, what is a majlis? Masaib, mimbar, niyaz. Let me give you one more. The wasiyat of Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. And Imam Zain al-Abidin, by the way, he would prepare the food himself. Because the food of majlis, the niyaz of majlis is not like other food. It's different. It's not like simple food. It has a sacredness, holiness to it. Mutabarrik, muqaddas. Hence, we don't call it food, we call it niyaz and tabarruk. Imam Sadiq outside would prepare the food. Imam Sadiq would give the water. Niyaz and sabil. What does Imam Muhammad al-Baqir say in his wasiyah to his son Imam Sadiq? He says, oh my son, listen. I'm passing away. But there are 400 dirham in my pocket, in that dress inside when you go to my house, in the cloak. I have left 400 dirham there on the side. Take that money and don't use it for anything except my azadari for the next 10 years in Mina. Hear it again and let it sink in. 400 dirham I leave behind and I make it waqf. I've reserved that money. Money of azadari is waqf, is reserved for azadari of Imam Hussain. Should not be spent on anything except the azadari of Imam Hussain. It says 400 dirham is waqf, reserved for what? My azadari. What do? Every year in Mina, when the Hajis gather in Mina, and Mina, when the Hujjaj gather, it is a majma. Imam did not want the azadari in Medina. Imam wanted the azadari in Mina, when the Hujjaj gather. For 10 years, recite Marsiya for me. For 10 years, do Matam for me. What does it show you? Two things. Spending on azadari and tasalsul al-azadari. Spending on azadari. He says this money is for azadari. spend it for me in the most busiest of times, so that everyone knows how mazloom al Muhammadah. By God, if you stop azadari, if you stop spending on azadari, if you stop gathering for azadari, dunya will forget how mazloom Abu Abdullah al-Hussain was. If today the dunya knows that Hussain is mazloom, do you know why? It's because of the azadari of Imam Hussain. If today the dunya knows what happened in Karbala, is because of azadari of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Who laid the foundations? Sayyid al-Sajjad. He built the mimbar. A mimbar was built in Ghadir as well. A mimbar was built by Imam Sajjad in Medina as well. What does that tell you? The mimbar has two main purposes. Ghadir, Fada'il Ali. Medina, Masaib Hussain. So if a person on the mimbar is not giving you Fada'il of Ali and the Masaib of Hussain, then he's not completing the requirements of the mimbar. He says, reserve this only for my azadari. The ayat that I recited is about Janabe Yaqub alayhi salatu wasalam. When they say, but this azadari is too far, we don't mourn on the dead. And if you tell them Hussain is not dead, he's alive, then they say we don't mourn on the living. But let me just compare Imam Sajjad's azadari to the azadari of Yaqub. Qala, what does Yaqub alayhi salam say? Ya asafa ala Yusufa. Hi mera Yusuf. Oh my Yusuf. He cried so much, oh Yusuf. He mourned so much, oh my son Yusuf. وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ. That he lost his eyesight. Yaqub alayhi salam, the Prophet Yaqub, he lost his eyesight, knowing very well that he was alive. Because the Quran says, he says to his sons, Izhabu, go and find him, you'll find him. Go to Misr. Go and look for him. Knowing very well that he was alive. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not condemn Yaqub. He praises Yaqub in the Holy Quran. For those who want dalil on crying, on azadari, crying is from Quran. Allah praised Yaqub. Yaqub knew Yusuf was alive. Ilme ghaib of the Prophet. Number one. Number two, when they asked Imam al-Baqir or Mawla, did Yaqub really know that Yusuf was alive or not? He says, yes, he did. Because he made a dua, he says, oh Allah, send Malakul Maut to me. Malakul Maut comes down, he says, oh Malakul Maut, do you extract the souls of each and every person yourself, or is your task distributed? He says, Ya Nabi Allah Yaqub, some souls I extract, some I divide with other angels of death. But all the souls that are extracted, they then come to me. He says, then tell me, is the soul of Yusuf with you? He says, no, the soul of Yusuf is not with me. Knowing Yusuf was alive, yet he cried on Yusuf. So Quran does not forbid crying on the living. Number one. Number two, what about crying on the dead? Let me give you three references. Tarikh al-Tabari, Tarikh of Ibn Athir, and Sirat Ibn Hisham. These are three historians of the Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, Sunni historians. They narrate from the wife of the Prophet, Ummul Mu'mineen, one of the wives, daughter of the first caliph. She says that when Rasulullah died, he was in my room. Obviously, we don't accept that, but it's from their books, so because they have a problem with us crying on the dead. She says that when Rasulullah passed away, he was in my room, in my house. And when he died, he passed away, I ran out of my house with other women crying and beating my face. So Ummul Mu'mineen, the mother of the believers, cried on Rasulullah after he died, and she beat her face. I mean, do we do anything different to that? when it comes to azadari? Do we do anything even remotely different to that? The only difference is we don't consider Imam Hussain as dead. Shaheed is living and he's Sayyidul Shuhada. Bilal, the companion of the Muazzin of the Prophet. In the days when Rasulullah was in his final moments, he was alive but unwell. He came knocking on the door of the Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, it's time for Salah. They told him Rasulullah is not well, he's not coming for Salah today. He began to cry and again he beat his face. He beat his head. Madarijun Nabuwa, the book Madarijun Nabuwa, Al-Sunnah. He cried and he beat his face. Ummul Mu'mineen cried when the Prophet passed away. Bilal, a Sahabi, cried when the Prophet was alive. I don't know if I'm handing this over or not. She cried when the Prophet had passed away. He cried when the Prophet was still alive. So whether you cry in the lifetime of the Prophet on the Prophet or after the life of the Prophet on the Prophet, there is no bid'ah in this. Let me give you Quran for those who say we don't accept hadith. When the two angels came to the Prophet Ibrahim and his wife Sarah, Ibrahim and Quran, Matam, where's Matam in the Holy Quran? Where does Shias get it from? Okay, fine, the crying is Prophet Yaqub. Where the Matam come from? Give us Quran. No, we don't want hadith. Even though the hadiths I gave are not from our books, because we believe Rasulullah didn't die in the house of Mu'mineen, he died in the lap of Ali ibn Abi Talib. What does the Quran say? When the two angels came to the house of Ibrahim and they said, "Oh Ibrahim, we give you the glad tidings of Ishaq." Sarah heard it. She came out and the Quran says she beat her face. She beat her face. Wajhaha. She hit her face, saying that I am old. I am barren. I am a barren old lady. I'm too old to have a child. They say, but this is the will of Allah. She beat her face in front of two angels and the Prophet. Did the Prophet stop him? Stop her? Did the Prophet say this is wrong, this is bid'ah, this is haram? So the next time you see someone beating their face for Abu Abdullah al-Hussain, do not criticize them. Why? Because we have too many ahadith and the ayat of Holy Quran is sarih, wadih, dalil. That out of sorrow, out of grief, if you beat your face or you beat your chest or you beat your head, there is absolutely no bid'ah or shirk involved in this. Recite salawat. So if Yaqub can cry on Yusuf, and I'm wrapping up. If Yaqub can cry on Yusuf, then Imam Hussain is greater than Yusuf. The maqam of Yusuf, the maqam of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Hussein's maqam is higher than that of Yusuf. Number one. Number two, the sufferings that Yusuf went through cannot be compared to the sufferings of Hussain. What happened to Yusuf happened in the house between his own brothers. He was thrown in the well and then he was rescued. So the musibah of Yusuf does not come close to the musibah of Abu Abdullah. La yawm ka yawmika ya Abu Abdullah. And this is a statement in which there is no doubt. Imam Hassan says this statement. Ayatollah Wahid al-Khurasani says this statement is qata'i as-sudur. In other words, there is no doubt in its authenticity. All of the Imams said one, La yawm ka yawmika ya Abu Abdullah. If Yusuf can cry so much that his eyes, he loses his eyesight, this is a damage. This is a damage to the body. But Allah does not criticize that damage. Now you tell me, what is more of a damage? Losing both of your eyes or a little bit of redness on the chest? I don't know if you're with me or you're half asleep. What is more damaging? Losing your two eyes or a bit of redness on your chest? Losing your eyes is like losing your life. Losing your eyes is like losing your whole future. That's why some of the ulama, they say, the blood money of the one who kills is the same as the one who takes away someone's 2 eyes. Because why? Taking away 2 eyes, I taken away a life. Yet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not criticize Yaqub. So if there's no wrong in that, there's no wrong in beating our chest for Aba Abdullah. I think I've given enough for Matam and Azadari for today. Niyaz and Tabarruk as well. I want to end, and tomorrow I will focus mainly on Urdu. Imam Sajjad cried. You know why he cried? Because Asra Ashur, Imam Hussain made a wasiyah to him. You know what Imam Hussain ﷺ says to Imam Sajjad when he leaves, when he bids farewell? He says, "Oh son Sajjad, go and tell my Shia, Ya Shi'ati, Mehma sharibtum ma azbin fazguruni." Oh my Shia, whenever you drink cold water, remember the thirst of Hussain. Some say this wasiyah was made to Imam Sajjad, some say this wasiyah was made to Sakina. Then Imam says, "Oh my Shia, I wish you had been there on the day of Ashura and you had seen how I carried my Ali Asghar and how I asked for water for the enemy for my 6-month-old baby. But when Hussain asked for water, he didn't get water. What does he get? He gets a 3-headed arrow in the neck of Ali Asghar. The blood of Ali Asghar is on the hands of Aba Abdullah. He wants to throw it towards the heaven. A call comes of Hussain, don't throw it towards the heavens. He wants to throw it to the ground. The ground says, oh Hussain, don't throw it towards the ground. He was far too innocent. He was far too small. What does Imam al-Hussain do? He rubs the blood of Ali Asghar onto his beard and he says, I shall meet Rasulullah like this. O Sajjad, tell them, whenever they drink water, they should remember my dry lips. They should remember my dry tongue. They should remember my breath that I took out of thirst. Ajrakum ala Allah. Where do I begin the musibah of Sayyid Sajjad? A person comes to Imam Sajjad. He says to him, Mawla, my children are getting married, come and bless our wedding. He says, I won't come. But yes, if you do a majlis, I shall come to your house. He says, Mawla, no problem, I will hold a majlis. He emphasizes and he says, Mawla, please come. He holds a majlis. You know what he does? He holds a majlis and he puts a specific chair for Imam Sajjad next to the mimbar. He says, Mawla, this chair is for you. Imam Sadiq sits on the chair for some time. The Zakir sits on the mimbar. He begins the mashaib. And there is girya and there is matam. Everyone cries. In that moment, he doesn't realize that Imam Zainul Abidin leaves the chair. He looks for him at the end of the majlis. He says, where is my Mawla? Do you know where he finds his Mawla? He finds his Mawla sitting outside by the shoes of the mu'mineen, where the mu'mineen would take off their shoes and come inside to the majlis. He comes to his Mawla. He says, Mawla Zainul Abidin, this place is not for you. Why do you sit here? Do you know what he says? And this will break your heart. He says, I want to see each and every mu'min who cried for my father, Aba Abdullah. Ajrakum ala Allah. He says, I want to see each and every mu'min who comes to the majlis of Hussain. Azadaro, O mu'mineen, O Shia. Imam knows you. Imam glances at your face. He knows your name. Do not take it lightly coming to the farshaza of Aba Abdullah. Imam sitting at the feet. Imam sitting where they keep their shoes. Why? Because we love those who cry for Hussain. Ajrakum ala Allah. One day, one of the mu'min, he comes to Imam Sajjad. He says, Mawla, what does he see? He comes to the house of Imam Sajjad. He says, Mawla, what are you doing? Imam is in sajda, he's crying. He says, Mawla, this azadari is enough. How much will you cry for Hussain? As soon as he says that,
فَرَفَعَ رَأْسُهُ. Imam raises his head and he says, وَيْحَكَ. He says, how dare you tell me to stop crying? Yaqub lost one son and he cried. Yaqub lost one son and he cried. I saw my father get slaughtered. I saw my brothers get slaughtered. I saw my uncles get slaughtered. Ajrakum ala Allah. May Bibi Zahra salamullah alayha make your intercession. May she make shafa'ah for you. Ajrakum ala Allah. He says, what do you mean? Yaqub cried on a son who knew was alive, but 16, 17 members of Bani Hashim were cut to pieces on the day of Ashura. Ajrakum ala Allah. Do you know what the hadith says? Do you know what the Maqtal says? How can I leave you with these final lines? Imam Sajjad says, never ever stop me from the azadari of Aba Abdullah. Ajrakum ala Allah. The hadith says there have been certain personalities in history who have cried uncontrollably, who have cried the most. Number one, Adam cried. In fact, Adam did matam. He would hit his leg and he would say, oh Allah, forgive me. He would cry and he would hit his leg. Adam cried for 40 years. Number two, Yaqub cried. He cried for Yusuf for years that he lost his sight. Number three, it is said that Yusuf cried because he missed his father. And number four, it is said that Imam Sajjad cried the most. But here number five, the hadith says there is another personality who cried so much that no one comes close to her crying. Do you know who that is? That is Fatima Al-Zahra. Ajrakum ala Allah. Fatima cried a lot. Sajjad cried a lot. But you know what the difference was? Sajjad cried a lot over a period of 30 years. Fatima cried a lot over the period of 2 months. Over a period of 2 months, Fatima Zahra had cried so much that her hair became white. I leave you with these final moments. There have been two. I don't know what it was that made Fatima cry, but she cried so much. Maybe she cried on the departure of Rasulullah. Maybe she cried that they took the haqq from Ali ibn Abi Talib. Maybe she cried that they burnt her door. Or maybe she cried because they crushed her between the door and the wall. Or maybe she cried because they broke her ribs. But I know it was one. I leave you with this. There have been 2 orphan children who were slapped after the deaths of their fathers. One was Zahra. When Rasulullah left the dunya, they came and they slapped her cheeks. And the second was Sakina. But you know what the difference was? Sakina was only 3 years old. Sakina would not sleep without the chest of Abu Abdullah. But when they slapped her, she found the chest of Abu Abdullah. But tell me, how does a child sleep on a chest that has been pounded with the hooves of the horses? ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين. يا حسين.
Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain.
Hussain, Ya 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 Hussain. Hey, Ya Hussain, 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 Ya Hey, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Sunama hal mein Shamdana na 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 Sunama hal Shamdana na Sunama hal mein 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 Shamdana na Sunama Shamdana na Sunama hal mein Shamdana na Sunama hal mein Sham de vich reh ke aaya saal mein Sham de vich reh ke aaya saal mein Shamdana na Sunama hal mein Shamdana na Sunama hal mein
شام دانا نا سناوا حال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال میں شام دے وچ رہ کے آیا سال میں شام دے وچ رہ کے آیا سال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال 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 میں ویر دی گرد تے خنجر چل گئے ویر دی گرد تے خنجر چل گئے کیوں نہ کسیاں ویر تیرے لال میں کیوں نہ کسیاں ویر تیرے نال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال 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 میں ویرا دے لاشے تے گھوڑے بچ گئے ویرا دے لاشے تے گھوڑے بچ گئے کیوں نہ ہویا ویر وے پامال میں کیوں نہ ہویا ویر وے پامال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال 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 میں ویرا دے لاشے تے گھوڑے بچ گئے ویرا دے لاشے تے گھوڑے بچ گئے کیوں نہ ہویا ویر وے پامال میں کیوں نہ ہویا ویر وے پامال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال 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 میں ویر دی گرد تے خنجر چل گئے ویر دی گرد تے خنجر چل گئے کیوں نہ کسیاں ویر تیرے نال میں کیوں نہ کسیاں ویر تیرے نال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال 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 میں شام دے وچ رہ کے آیا سال میں شام دے وچ رہ کے آیا سال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال میں ہر جگہ تے 9 گھنٹے لگ گئے ہر جگہ تے 9 گھنٹے لگ گئے ڈھونڈ دی ریا براد بال میں ڈھونڈ دی ریا براد بال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال 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 میں ہر جگہ تے 9 گھنٹے لگ گئے ہر جگہ تے 9 گھنٹے لگ گئے ڈھونڈ دی ریا براد بال میں ڈھونڈ دی ریا براد بال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال میں ویراں دے لاشے تے گھوڑے بچ گئے ویراں دے لاشے تے گھوڑے بچ گئے کیوں نہ ہویا ویر وے پامال میں کیوں نہ ہویا ویر وے پامال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال 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 میں شام دے وچ رہ کے آیا سال میں شام دے وچ رہ کے آیا سال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال 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 میں ویر دالا شاوی نادف نایا میں ویر دالا شاوی نادف نایا میں ٹر پیا ہتھ رسی پا کے شام میں ٹر پیا ہتھ رسی پا کے شام میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال 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 میں ویر دالا شاوی نادف نایا میں ویر دالا شاوی نادف نایا میں ٹر پیا ہتھ رسی پا کے شام میں ٹر پیا ہتھ رسی پا کے شام میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال میں شام دانا نا سناوا حال میں شام ہر جگہ تے 9 گھنٹے لگ گئے، ہر جگہ تے 9 گھنٹے لگ گئے، ڈھونڈتی رہیا براد بال میں، ڈھونڈتی رہیا براد بال میں، شام دانا نہ سنا حال 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 میں، ویر دیگر تے خنجر چل گئے، ویر دیگر تے خنجر چل گئے، کیوں نہ کسیاں ویر تیرے نال میں، کیوں نہ کسیاں ویر تیرے نال میں، شام دانا نہ سنا حال میں، شام دانا نہ سنا حال میں،
السلام علیکہ یا نبی اللہ والسلام علیکہ یا رسول اللہ، السلام علیکہ یا حجت اللہ والسلام علیکہ یا باعث الہدا والسلام علیکہ یا حبیب اللہ والسلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ یا ابا عبداللہ الحسین، السلام علیکہ یا ابن رسول اللہ، السلام علیکہ یا ابن امیر المومنین وابن سید الوسیین، السلام علیکہ یا ابن فاطمۃ الزہرا سیدات النساء العالمین، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ مولا یا غریب الغربا، والسلام علیکہ یا معین الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیکہ یا مغیث الشیعۃ والزوار فی یوم الجزاء، السلام علیکہ یا انیس النفوس، السلام علیکہ یا ایھا المدفون بارض طوس، السلام علیکہ وعلی آبائک سبعہ وابنائک الاربعہ ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ مولا یا صاحب العصر والزمان، الامان الامان الامان، السلام علیکہ یا خلیفۃ الرحمن، السلام علیکہ یا امام الانس والجان، السلام علیکہ یا شریک القرآن، السلام علیکہ یا قامی الکفر والطغیان، السلام علیکہ یا دافع ظلم والعدوان، اجل اللہ تعالی فرجک وسہل اللہ تعالی مخرجک وظہورک ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم، اللہم کل ولیک حجت ابن الحسن، صلواتک علیہ وعلی آبائہ فی ہذہ الساعہ وفی کل ساعہ، ولیاً وحافظاً وقائداً وناصراً ودلیلاً وعینا، حتیٰ تسکنہ ارضک طوعا وتمتعہ فیہا طویلا، برحمتک یا ارحم الراحمین۔